Support comes from New York State United Teachers, a union of professionals standing with more than 600,000 workers in education, human services, and healthcare with the Our Voice, Our Values, Our Union campaign. And United University Professions, representing 37,000 academic and professional employees at SUNY campuses and teaching hospitals across New York State. Frederick E. Cole, President. UUPinfo.org.
It's the Capital Connection. Hi, I'm Alan Chartock. With us this week is the wonderful Blair Horner, the Executive Director of the New York Public Interest Research Group, or NYPIRG, and the smartest man I know about New York State politics. He's back again, and we love that. You could come every week as far as I'm concerned. Welcome, Blair.
Thanks for having me.
So, first of all, any thoughts on the hearing this week of the January 6th Capitol riots and the number 3 House Republican, Elise Stefanik, of New York's 21st District, falsely claiming that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was to blame for the attack?
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's like, don't believe your eyes, believe what I'm saying. I mean, it's unbelievable. We all saw the TV images. I didn't see Nancy Pelosi once storming the Capitol. I didn't see her once assailing a Capitol police officer. I didn't see her once using fire extinguishers to bash over the head of the guards that were there.
Or bear spray.
Or bear spray, anything, right? So I didn't see Pelosi once. And you'd think she'd be obvious if she was storming the Capitol. So this is the classic where Congresswoman Stefanik is talking to the base, hoping that they either don't believe their own eyes or don't remember what happened and are willing to accept at face value that somehow Pelosi is responsible. I mean, the argument is that's because Pelosi and Pelosi as the speaker was in charge of security. And I actually heard this from one of the trolls on Twitter, is that because the Capitol Police let the rioters into the Capitol, that therefore Pelosi is responsible. And again, don't believe your eyes, right? It didn't look like they were opening the doors and saying, come on in.
Thousands of people and 150 people guarding the Capitol.
That's right.
It's just...
I mean, the key thing here, and I think that's important that the hearings go forward, is you have to find out what was the leadership and who funded it. Follow the money is a long time honored tradition. All these buses and people showing up at the rally, all of that stuff just didn't happen. The organization that occurred in terms of the videos of the various militia groups getting themselves in position to sort of assault the Capitol Police, that was all a coup attempt. I don't call it insurrection. It was a coup attempt to shut down the democratic process. It's terrible.
That's why I
think one of the worst things in American history since 1865.
Well, you're right, and it may be one of the worst things in American history, period, because this is the first time we saw those people like this in the seat of democracy, the Capitol.
General Lee never got the Confederate flag to the Capitol building.
Nicely put. So, Elise Stefanik, let's stay with her for a moment. This radio station, which you are hearing this on, it covers a good deal of her congressional district, if not all of it, and it's huge. Yes. And the question I have is, what's she up to? So I have a theory, and the theory is that she wants to be the vice presidential nominee the next time around with Donald Trump, and that it'd be a woman, it'd be a young woman, it'd be somebody with congressional experience. That's the way it's looking to me, that she's positioning herself to do that. What do you think?
Well, I mean, that's a very interesting observation. When she first got elected, she ran as sort of a moderate Republican,
right,
sort of classic Northeast Republican. And she embraced President Trump after he got elected. And the politics of what has happened since then has worked to her advantage. She won easily in her district in the last election. She's moved up to the number 3 spot, despite the fact that she's relatively new to the House, although she was a staffer there, so it's not like this is all brand new to her. And so in terms of the Republican Party, it may be the ticket to certainly higher position within the party, maybe the vice presidential nominee. It certainly would help take some of the sting if Trump is the nominee for the Republicans out of some of the anti-women sort of things he said and the way he's behaved. To have her as a running mate would certainly help balance some of that out. But I mean, who knows what's going on in her head? And then there's also the 2022 election, And who knows what her district line is going to look like when she runs that time. So we'll see. I mean, you never know. I think you had one guy on your show once talking about between now and then a pope could be born. And so it's entirely possible that, things could change dramatically and she'll become a moderate again.
The guy who said that his name was Mario.
That's right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the governor. I mean, things are going, if you could say this, relatively well for Governor Cuomo. It looks like he's sort of out of trouble. Let's start with the Speaker of the New York State Assembly and his saying there ain't going to be an impeachment.
Well, he didn't say that exactly. What he said was, at least it's been reported, that and then there's this sort of back and forth between people saying, well, he didn't mean what, your ears heard. His argument was, well, the Attorney General's report, when it comes out, would not necessarily be the deciding factor on whether or not the Assembly would move to impeach. And so, I mean, if you look at it purely in hypothetical terms, of course that's true. You don't even know what's in the report yet, so how could you possibly say that? But to sort of set it up as if no matter what came out of the Attorney General's report, the Assembly wouldn't necessarily impeach. Obviously that's why there was sort of a firestorm in reaction to the Speaker's comments, because it seemed, one way to interpret it is that his motivation is to try to exonerate the governor. The governor's not out of the woods, of course. The Attorney General's report will come out at some point, and it looks at both sexual harassment and the book deal. Don't forget the comptroller referred the book deal to the Attorney General's office, too. And so I don't know how that's all going to play out. We'll see. The one advice I would have to the governor is the governor recently said there's a political investigation into him by the Attorney General. But early 2021, Governor Cuomo said, let's wait till the facts come out before we draw conclusions. And so I suggested the current governor, he listened to what the earlier governor said a few months ago, that we all sort of wait, see what the facts are, and sort of take it from there.
To quote the former United States Senator Al D'Amato, who once said, that was then and this is now. So,
the governor's, arguments is that somehow it's political because June Kim is involved in the investigations and he had worked for Preet Bharara and put behind bars some of the governor's top aides, that somehow that's political. That doesn't add up. I mean, the guy was the acting U.S. attorney and works at a, powerful law firm now. And so unless there's some other thing that the governor meant by that.
Anything to muddy the waters.
It certainly does muddy the waters.
Yeah. So the election itself is very interesting, the potential gubernatorial election. So let's assume that Andrew is out of the woods to some degree. It doesn't look like Carl Hastie is acting to get him in to carry on an impeachment right now. So Andrew runs again. But there's something called the Working Families Party, which may really hurt Andrew. We know they hate his guts. They have in the past anyway.
But they have endorsed him in the past, too.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay. But now it's coming up. If they put a candidate up and the Republicans put a candidate up, it could be a political death knell for Andrew.
Yeah, there was U.S. Senator Goodell at one point, wasn't there?
Remember him.
Was able to, Javits, they split the Republican vote.
They did.
I mean, who knows? Again, the Working Families Party still has to deal with hurdles that are new for minor parties, much higher voter turnout hurdles. They have to get a certain, now they did in the presidential, they got a certain number of votes, so they should be, relatively smooth sailing in terms of being ready for the ballot in 2024. But they do have to make a calculation that if they want to stay as a viable minor party in New York State, they have to get, I think it's about 130,000 votes on the gubernatorial line. And so that's considerably more than 50,000, which it used to be. And so,
Which, by the way, Andrew engineered, I'm sure. So
he did, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the legislature agreed to it. It's not like he did it unilaterally. Yeah. But those are the rules, and they're going to, obviously self-preservation is going to be a calculation in how they view it as well. And the problem with all this is anytime you run for a fourth term, no matter who you are, Michael Bloomberg, Nelson Rockefeller, and Mario Cuomo, or if you're thinking about it when you're George Pataki, third terms are rough. People get tired of just having you around.
Yeah. And
for a Democratic governor to run for a fourth term when there's a Democratic president, I think is additionally difficult. So, again, we'll see what the governor, Andrew Cuomo, wants to do. I mean, he hasn't made any decisions yet. We still don't have the Attorney General's report. It may completely exonerate him, in which case, he's raised a lot of money. he would be in certainly a strong position going into 24.
Blair Horner, he's got something like $18 million in the bank. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. You referred to the book deal. I want to go back to that because I have a lot of fun with this one.
Did you read it?
Yes.
Wow.
I wrote a book. I wrote a book about his father.
No, I thought, did you read
Yes.
his book,
No,
Andrew's?
right. Yeah,
Okay,
no, I
all
read
right,
it.
All right, got it.
So because
I have.
he kept asking me, did you read it? Did you read it? Did you read it? And he did. That's when he was talking to me, which he doesn't seem to be doing these days. So anyway, I wrote a book called Me and Mario, Conversations in Candor. It was an excellent book. I mean, if I do say so myself.
And you will.
It was because Mario is great stuff, and
That's right.
he's funny, and he's all of that. We captured an awful lot of that. I got not a sou for that book. Andrew is going to get $4 or $5 million, $5.1 million for this book. I don't see what's illegal about that, by the way. Maybe you could explain that.
Well, the rule is if you're a full-time employee of the executive branch, you're not allowed to have outside income. That's the deal. I mean, you're not supposed to. You have to request approval by
Which
the
he
Joint
did.
Commission on Public Ethics. And they gave him
Which is his
permission.
group, basically.
Well, there is that, right? And so, I mean, the issue there is really the Joint Commission on Public Ethics. Apparently, again, we don't know all the details because they operate in secret, but the governor's council sent a letter to Jacob saying that they should approve it. But as far as we know, Jacob never asked how much the deal was worth. You would think that would be a material question to ask. They apparently never sent it to the full commission of Jacob to approve it, which is sort of astonishing given the size of the deal. So, yeah, you're right that it's not illegal. If Jacob said he can do it, then he can do it. But it is sort of an odd thing, right? I mean, the governor writes a book, and he's a full-time employee. He's the highest paid governor in the country. He writes a book for $5 million about the work that he did as governor while he's governor. So, again, let's assume for the moment the Joint Commission sort of reviewed this appropriately. They did say you can't use any resources, government public resources, in writing the book. And the issue that the comptroller forwarded to the Attorney General is there have been media reports and some comments made by junior level staff that they, in fact, did do it, work on the book while on public payroll. So, again, that'll get sorted out, and it may be that, it's perfectly fine. I mean, who knows? But I think it's a damning indictment of the Joint Commission on Public Ethics that it didn't at least go to the commission. And again, I think they have a responsibility to all of us to tell us how did they make that decision. I mean, that's a big deal. $5.1 million is not chicken scratch.
No, not even chump change.
And even for you, Alan. And so
I should live so long.
Yeah, right. And so that's the issue, really. It's like, how does that get teased out? The Senate Ethics Committee is having a hearing on this actually later in August. So we may get some more answers when that happens.
Now let's talk about good news for Andrew Cuomo. The DOJ, Department of Justice, drops the nursing home deaths investigation. This is a win for Cuomo, right?
Sure looks like it. I mean, the sort of the central question there was again, there's another investigation going on at the same time, sort of looking at some of the same issues. And so it's not entirely clear to me where one begins and where the other ends. But I assume that the governor's people's argument to DOJ it was sort of the fog of war equivalent, right? No one knew what was going on. Everyone was trying to figure out how to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, and decisions were being made in real time. And again, I completely sympathetic to the families of nursing home residents who died. Completely sympathetic as to their situation.
Remembering what was at stake here, the whole idea was the nursing home, should take back the COVID patients.
That's right. And now, again, it's a fight over how do you handle that appropriately and were they following guidelines. I assume part of the governor's argument at the time was get them out of the hospitals because we thought we were going to be overwhelmed with real patients. That's why they brought the ship in.
Sure. The ship being, there was a hospital ship.
Yeah, you're right. There was federal government said a military hospital ship into the harbor of New York City because people thought we were going to be overwhelmed. They set up hospital operations MASH units in Central Park. So, I mean, you have to look at that a little bit in context. But again, I am not in a position to sort of weigh in on right or wrong, but it's certainly it justifies at least the governor's actions in a way that allows him to sort of, claim, as he has in the last few days, that he's been exonerated.
So let's go back to the concept of a three-way election or a two-way election. The Republicans seem to have a bit of a death wish in trying to recruit somebody to run for this office almost unanimously now, although there are a couple of people like Rob Asserino and others who would like to claim this. And they're Trumpers in blue state New York. I don't get that.
Yeah. The nominee is, apparent, is that they're sort of coalescing around this Congressman Zeldin from Long Island, who was a state senator before he was in the Congress and, had a reputation when you dealt with him as sort of a reasonable, smart guy, sort of your classic conservative. A certainly conservative guy, but not the kind of person that was so ideological you couldn't have a conversation with him. And, reason and smart and interactive and, interested in the substance.
And a Trumper.
And since he's become a member of Congress, he actually stepped forward and, sort of defended the coup attempt, and only recently and seemingly...
That'll be a good commercial.
Yeah, and seemingly begrudgingly agreed that, Biden's the president. So I don't see how the math adds up. On the other hand, he does have to work his way through the Republican Party, and I assume he'll tack to the center if he is eventually the nominee. And, if the governor is the nominee for the Democrats, he'll have... again, we don't know how all these other issues we've discussed earlier are going to play out, but he may have some ammunition of his own.
Now, what about Tish James? She is of course, the Attorney General, almost Governor AG and all. And Cuomo has made some claims about how political she is.
Because she's a politician.
Because she, like he, is a politician. Yeah. One wonders, however, whether she'll have the guts, if he's in it, to run against him in a primary. I suspect not.
Well, I mean, again, this really does hinge on what happens in these investigations. And
well, you can make assumptions. Assumption, nothing is going to happen.
Well, I mean, if the reports, if the various investigations end up exonerating the governor, or at least certainly not clearly hammering away at him, I would think that he would be he would want to run for a fourth term, and she probably wouldn't want to challenge him. But she is a politician, and every politician in their heads thinks someday they could be president, right?
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
that's the way they operate, and that's the way they think, which is the way it works. The question really is do you twist the truth? Do you lie? Do you mischaracterize the facts? Do you smear your opponents? Those are the issues as to where public officials misbehave or their staff misbehave. And that's where I think people could be held to account. If the Attorney General wants to think about running for governor someday, more power to her. That's why she's in the business she's in.
Yeah. Well, we do know that Andrew Cuomo is capable of sitting up in the dark and thinking about potential enemies. Another guy whose name has come up, of course, is the state controller, Tom DiNapoli. But Cuomo seems more intent on attacking the woman in this case, Tish James.
Well, I mean, she has the report. DiNapoli doesn't. Right. And so anything, by raising these issues, you're effectively muddying the waters, as you mentioned earlier, on what the investigation may or may not say. And since the governor's certainly heightened his implied criticism of the report before it even came out, after he was deposed, one would think that he's nervous about the whole thing, and that's one of the reasons why he's laying the groundwork for whatever report comes out, no matter what kind of criticisms it may have. So, that's the way it all sort of plays, and I understand that. But the public deserves public officials in particular to be interested in, playing it straight.
The New York mayoral primary, the winner, Eric Adams, in a video recording of his speech Monday night in Queens, shows him telling his supporters that the battle he faced wasn't with his political rivals in the election, but with the Democratic Socialists of America. In other words, AOC. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, the Democratic primary was really, by the way, a fascinating thing. They used ranked choice voting for the first time, and it was a nail-biter.
Hey, I'm a political scientist. I've, been around for a long time. I'm old. I have no idea how that whole thing works.
Well, it's I'll take column A, I'll take column B. But it played out, and it was interesting because Adams was viewed, as was Garcia, the second place person in the primary, as sort of moderate, mainstream Democrats. And Maya Wiley and some of the other candidates was sort of viewed as a left candidate, Wiley. And so, I mean, in a sense, he's right that it was really the progressive wing of the party versus the mainstream element of the party in terms of the primary. But I mean, from the Democratic Socialists of America perspective, that was a great ad.
So why is he doing it?
Well, when you're recording a speech that you're giving to somebody, sometimes people say things in a less than careful way. I think the correct way to view that is it was the progressives versus the mainstream Democrats, and he, being a former police officer, former Republican, won. And I think the idea that the progressives were opposed to him, I think, is an accurate portrayal. The DSA offers a lot of volunteer muscle for campaigns in New York City. They're very sophisticated. They have a point of view that matches up with a lot
These
of
are the
what's
socialists
happening.
now,
The Democratic Socialists of America. Very well organized, know how to run campaigns. So they're formidable within the city of New York, and they backed progressive candidates.
But it does look like Eric Adams is going ahead and making a real splash politically, both on the state and local level, and also on the national level.
Yeah, that's right. He was welcome to the White House, even though he's the Brooklyn Borough president, right?
But he's
and nominee.
like Biden, he's a moderate.
Yes, that's exactly right. And if you're looking for ways to create a narrative to deal with issues like police brutality and inappropriate policing, particularly of communities of color, and you have a black mayor wannabe, former police officer who's the nominee of the biggest city in the country, and I mean, I think most people would bet that he'll get elected in November, that is a different sort of way to create a reaction to a real problem in communities across the country without having it the only solution being defund the police.
Blair Horner, you and I talk a lot about climate change. NYPIRG released its climate scorecard in May, which looks at the state's progress towards climate goals. What'd you find out?
Well, one of the things we always are very interested in at NYPIRG is, the rhetoric of electeds versus the reality. Governor Pataki had promised that New York was going to hit certain goals by a certain date. Governor Patterson said we're going to hit certain energy goals by a certain date.
Remember him?
Yes. Never came close. Never came close. And so now there's a law that passed in 2019 that sets new goals for the state, and they're appropriate goals. I mean, the Western North America is on fire. Parts of the world are having once in a millennium floods. I mean, this is like catastrophic changes in the climate that if left, if they plays out and nothing gets done, millions of people are going to needlessly suffer. And the people who are going to suffer the most are the people in the poorest countries that had nothing to do with global warming. It's going to be the wealthier countries that are going to sort of try to deal with it with their money. So we wanted to see how New York was doing. And there's no scorecard for the goals that they've set. They said, for example, they said basically they're going to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions in net by the year 2050. Well, how are we doing? So one of the things we found out is there's been very, very little progress so far on alternative energy sources. That really, when you look at the numbers, the vast bulk of non-fossil fuel power that New York attributes its renewable energy to is the old hydro dams that are up across northern New York. And those things have been in place since, they were probably built when Eisenhower was president. So these things have been around a long time. And so that's not really the solar, wind, energy efficiency, geothermal ways that you have to get to it. And so we were urging the Climate Action Council, who's responsible for implementing the state's plans, to develop its own scorecard, because we think public accountability is the way you deal with it. Humans are humans, and they often wait until the last minute to do things. And when it comes to climate change, you're not going to be able to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 by acting in 2049. You have to start taking steps now.
We're going to have a new DA in Manhattan, New York County. What can you tell us about all of that?
Well, Cyrus Vance Jr. Is leaving. The Democrats have nominated a new candidate. I believe he'd be the first black DA if he is elected in November. The big issue there, I think the world is watching, is what does he do with the Trump cases? That really is. They in concert with the state's attorney general are looking at how the Trump organization acted and how the new DA, whoever it is, deals with that. I think is going to be historical. Could be historical. They may find out, of course, that the Trump organization did nothing wrong, although that you wouldn't think that given the way they're behaving.
So the Senate Ethics Chair, Alexandra Biaggi, and reform advocates say they are still intent on trying to fix the troubled agency, which we referred to before, JCOPE. They're supposed to be the umpires, but it's turned out that, the governor has put most of the people in place there, or a controlling interest. And how could we ever get to a point where we have an honest broker there?
Yeah, I mean, ethics laws only work if they're enforced. And I mean, that's probably true about many laws, right? If people drive on the thruway, Route 90 going to Massachusetts, for example, and the speed limit 65, and their speed traps, they tend to drive around 65, and if they're not, they drive around 80. So it's the same sort of thing with ethics. You need the speed traps. So who are those people? Well, right now we've complained about this group, and I've talked to you about this in the past. They're created to be political. They're created to represent the appointing authorities, and it's the appointing authorities who are regulated by the entity. So that's like asking Exxon to pick the EPA administrator, right? I mean, they have an inherent conflict of interest. And so we've always thought you have to put it in the Constitution. There's something called the Commission on Judicial Conduct, which oversees the judicial branch's ethics. And it's in the state constitution. And the members are appointed by the executive and the legislature, not the judicial branch. And so we've always argued you do the opposite. Have the courts pick. Now, the problem is disturbing.
Picks the judges, too.
Yeah, it's very disturbing, is no one believes the Court of Appeals is independent enough of the governor, which when people say that to me, I'm horrified. And then secondarily, I'm just like, well, you have to fix that too. But ultimately, you need to have appointees whose first responsibility is the public that they serve, not their appointing authority, shouldn't have any conflicts of interest, and they're supposed to enforce the law without fear or favor. And the classic example, about a year or so ago, when the J. Cope was having a private conversation, which under the law has to be private, about what to do about the governor's top aide who was convicted by the U.S. Attorney's Office of corruption. What should they do about him in terms of violations of the public officers law, because he was running the campaign out of the governor's office and nobody saw him, which is sort of like magical. And so they were deciding what to do. And the word got back to the governor that conversation was happening and who was advocating that they should do something. And he called the Speaker's office. And the Speaker's appointee confirmed that was true, that in fact the Speaker called him and said, the governor called me. So one of the commissioners quit over this. And, we need to have an independent entity. There's no doubt about it. And the legislature has a responsibility to fix this problem.
Well, Blair Horner, as long as you're on the white horse and you have the big hat on, we'll be inviting you back to explain all of this. Blair Horner is, of course, the head guy at the New York Public Interest Research Group, or NYPIRG, and we so appreciate your being here.
Thanks for having me out.